In recognition of the investment of our past presidents, Adat Ari, which is celebrating its 75th anniversary this year, the committee has chosen to honor them by asking each one of them again to once occupy the presidential seat on the Bima on Shabbat. And each week, our past president honoree will share an anecdote or reflection from his or her experience as past president, as well as the announcements themselves. This week, we are honored to be honoring Herb Weisberg, who served in 1985 and again in 1989. Herb was the president, by the way, when David Silverstein joined as our cantor here on staff. He is a great storyteller, and I am told by my senior rabbi emeritus, by Rabbi Rothblum, that it was Herb who supplied Rabbi Rothblum with many of his best jokes. Pleasure to be able to invite up Herb Weisberg.
Thank you, Rabbi. I like the way he just did the announcements. The way we have to do announcements, you know, it reminds me of the old story about the first prize is getting to stand up here and see an awful lot of old friends. The second prize is to read announcements. In any event, Shabbat Shalom. It's good to see you all here this morning. Thank you for joining us here at our spiritual home at Adat Ari. I'd like to thank those who have participated in our services this morning, our Dashan, Mark Blatt, our Gabayim, Adam Spiegel and Jim Lesserman, our Pekuye Desimra, Eitan Wallace, Abal Shacharit, Mika Bernhard, our Musaf, Noah Wallace, our Torah readers, Julie Levine, Matthew Renetsky, Chava Friedman, Andrew Gerson, Eitan and Noah Wallace, Talia Bromberg, our Haftorah, Gabe Kachuk, our Ashrei and Torah service, Joel Seligman, our Aliyah coordinator, Dr. Mark Bressler, our usher, Wayne Schulman, and our greeters, Jeff Chain and Elise Weiss. Today's Kiddush is being hosted by the Sisterhood and will be served outside the sanctuary. We're pleased to welcome the participation of the USY West Coast Heschel Studies this weekend, who have come from both Northern and Southern California and Arizona to study together this Shabbat. The weekend is being co-chaired by our own Gabe Kachet, along with Andrew Gerson and Lily Schwartzman. We are also honored to have with us the Far West Regional and now International USY President Michael Sachs. USY will have a private Shabbat in Russell Hall immediately following the services. We urge you to have your calendars marked to be able to join us for our Yom HaShoah Memorial Service tomorrow evening, April 7th, and on Yom HaSmod concert on April 18th. All the information may be found in your announcement sheets. Additionally, we'd like to invite you for the Rosh Chodesh Women's Gathering on Wednesday, April 10th at 7:30 p.m. at the home of Sharon Gersh. Please check monitors and a website for all information. As you know, we have a runoff for mayor in Los Angeles. The AJC Los Angeles, ADL, and American Jewish University invite you to attend their mayoral debate on April 11th. RSVPs are required, and you may find out information on the flyers on the counter in the sanctuary lobby. In the keeping with the spirit of Shabbat, we ask that you not use your cell phones or cameras while on synagogue grounds. As you leave the sanctuary, please be sure to pick up a copy of our weekly Shabbat Shalom booklet for news of our upcoming events and times for our daily minyan. If you have a guest or a visitor who'd like to know more about Adat Ari, make sure you introduce him to one of the members' families, and feel free to speak with our rabbis or the cantor after services. Next week, our past president honoree will be Manny Kaplan, who served in 1987 and 1988. We welcome him back to the Bima. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to the first Shabbat after 8 days of eating pressed concrete. This is an unusual congregation, not just because of the past presidents, but also because of some incredible staff that we've had in the past. I think, of course, of Cantor Ellen Michelson of blessed memory, our executive director, Irma Liettinger of blessed memory, and the wonderful director of education, Emil Jacoby. These were wonderful people who made it possible for this synagogue to grow. And then, of course, incredible people like we've always had in this congregation. There's a few here who I would love to mention because they've always been special to me. The first is a woman that my wife always said was the best teacher she ever had. She raised two sons while being a member of this congregation and taught at the UJ, now called something else, and that, of course, I'm referring to is Lois Weinstein. Now, some of you may not know that name. She married some guy and her mother said he'll never amount to anything. Well, the result is Rabbi Rothman. The second is somebody who's been special to my family for a number of years, and that's my good friend, our good friend, Moshe Melnick, who was the teacher to all three of my children and who continues to teach us and imbue us with his spirit. He's a young 80, and he still works out 5 times a week, and he's always here in Shabbat. Moshe, it's a delight to see you. And last but certainly not least is a young lady who to me will always be the first lady of Adat Ari, and that's my good friend Bee Reynolds. Bee and her late husband Fred, who was a past president of this synagogue, always were very, very kind to me, even when they were on opposite sides of the fence on political issues. But Bee, it's always a delight to see you and see at least one of your sons, Peter, here, and know that Ronnie isn't far behind. So, Rabbi said that I have about 6 to 7 minutes. It takes me that long to clear my throat. And as I told him before the service today, it's much better to ask for forgiveness than permission. So having said that, I'll just cover a few items that I recall being president of the synagogue so many years ago. Of course, I was privileged to be a darshan many, many times. And very important to me and my family was the fact that my father of blessed memory gave the Torah that belonged to he and my Zeta to this synagogue, and I was privileged to see not only my children, but my grandchildren, 5 generations of our family read from this Torah, which has been borrowed by nephews and nieces and loaned out, if you will, but it resides here at Adat Ari. That Torah is now over 120 years old and has belonged in my family for over 70 years. I also had the good fortune to serve as chairman of the board for Leo Dezoritz, one of our really great past presidents. Leo served for 3 years, and I learned a great deal from him. I've been a member of this congregation for 47 years, joined in 1966 when that young man, Julie Schlesinger, was president. In 1985, the first time I was president, I remember very distinctly meeting with Irma Lee on a weekly basis. Irma Lee didn't like to drive on the freeway. I lived in the West Valley. She lived in the West Valley. We would meet at Cable's for coffee, and then we waited for the traffic to die down. She would drive all the way on Ventura Boulevard. We would discuss whatever was happening in the synagogue, and this was every single week. And the other significant thing is that I was successful in getting the number of trustees and board members reduced. We used to have an ungovernable amount of board members and trustees. There were a dozen for each of 3 years. They were overlapping, and it was like we the people. So we cut it down to 6, 6, and 6. 1989, it was difficult getting a president, and I was chairman of the nominating committee, so I know how difficult it was. My good buddy Ernie Goodman served on that nominating committee with me, and we went through a bunch of names, and our first choice was Mel Wynn, but Mel said he couldn't do it, but he promised to do it the following year. We then went to a second and third choice, and both of those, who were longtime friends of mine, said, no, we can't do it, we can't do it. I said, you guys have got to do it. We've got a big job ahead of us. We have got to build a day school. And this can't be done in 1 year. It's got to take a succession of presidents. So I got a commitment at that point, not only from Mel Wynn, but also from Erwin Goldring and Bruce Newman. And so we had the next 6 years covered. After that, I figured it was somebody else's problem. because of that, I advised the board that it was vital that we set up a new position called chairman of the board, which would be elected. And that chairman of the board would know 2 years in advance that he was going to be the next president, instead of going through this all of the time. And so we did that. And the first thing I did was hire a young man named Manny Forrester, who was a fundraiser, to help us in the building fund, which was a Herculean job. He said to me, "You've got to negotiate the lead gift." And sometime I'll tell you that story. But suffice to say that I was able to work out an arrangement with Bruce Wizen, and we had our lead gift, and so we were off and running. And Mel and Irwin and Bruce really brought this building project to its fruition. And sadly, that year also, I had to deliver a eulogy for my great and good friend, Irma Lee Ettinger, who was with us for so long. Two things that stand out in my memory is I was chief usher the day the Yom Kippur War took place. And I was here at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I heard it on the radio driving over, and I went up to Rabbi Wise and told him about it. He, of course, only had to walk a block or two from his house. He couldn't believe it. I said, "I think you better turn the radio on, Rabbi." He did, and of course, he completely threw away his sermon. And I had heard Rabbi Wise speak many, many times, but he was incredible that day. And he literally brought the congregation to its feet. And the other time I remember a unique time when he spoke, and I had heard Aaron Wise speak literally hundreds of times. It was when he returned from Shiva after burying Pop Wise, his father, in Jerusalem. He returned home and told us about the raid on Entebbe from his perspective, because he was at the airport greeting all of those soldiers and people who were saved. It's been my privilege to know our last three rabbis on a very personal basis. Aaron Wise, we had a Cleveland connection. Aaron Wise's mother-in-law, Rebecca Lipson, was my Hebrew school teacher. And the first people we looked up when we moved out here was Rabbi Wise. Of course, I was a young teenager at that time, but my parents told me the reason we couldn't join Rabbi Wise's synagogue is because we lived in town and the valley was so very far away. Of course, there were no freeways. It was only Laurel Canyon. And my father, being used to Cleveland roads, drove Laurel Canyon once, and he said, "It's enough." Rabbi Wise, to some, was an unapproachable figure, but not to me, nor any of the presidents who served and worked with him. My next-door neighbors were Jack and Uni Berman, and they were Aaron and Miriam's very good friends. We would peek over the fence and see who was barbecuing hamburgers and made it smell so much. It was Rabbi Wise. So, you know, when you've seen somebody burn hamburgers, you have a different relationship with him than if you're just watching him on the bimah spouting out some platitudes. When our son Jeff was in Israel for his freshman year, he spent part of Pesach with Miriam and Aaron. He called us from Jerusalem telling my wife, "You know, Mom, Mrs. Wise wears the same house coat and aprons you do." Rabbi Wise often quoted the humorist Sam Levinson, who said, and you'll know in a moment why he loved this phrase, "It's so simple to be wise. Just think of something stupid to say and then don't say it." Aaron added to that, "I just got lost in thought. It was an unfamiliar territory." As many of you know, Miriam loved jokes, and she and I would exchange them very often. Rabbi Wise overheard me telling her a story and interrupted me after the first line, which was, "Two old Jews were on their way." He said, "Why do all the stories you tell, why are they always about Jewish people, and why do so many jokes begin with Jews?" I said, "I'm very sorry, I'll start again. Two old Chinese men were on their way to the synagogue to see the rabbi." Another one he particularly liked was the story of the Gabbai who approached a visitor in shul and said, "I want to give you an aliyah. What is your name?" He said, "Esther ben Moshe." He says, "No, I need to know your name. He said, my name is Esther ben Moshe. The Gabbai said, how can it be your name? The man says, I've been having financial difficulties, and so everything is in my wife's name. Rabbi Wise understood that religion, which is unchanging, is an idea that betrays the Torah. If we read the book the same way it was written 3,000 years ago, we haven't grown. He taught us that it's not important to always be right. It's important to get it right. That's why he spoke out against the Vietnam War very early on, when the government escalated way back in 1964. That wasn't a popular sermon for him to give, but he did it. That's why he marched with Dr. King in Selma. As Aaron Wise said so succinctly, reading from the Torah isn't learning, it's a ritual. We read from the Torah, but we study from the Chumash. His advice was to pick out one or two of the major themes in the Sidra, and in 15 minutes or so, related to our own personal experience and develop the relevance to us in modern times. The old Chinese proverb, tell me and I will forget. Show me and I will remember. Involve me and I will understand. He started the Darshan program, which has been going in the synagogue now for some 50 years. He told me one story, and I used it as my own, but it really was Rabbi Wise's. It dealt with a rabbi whose son had just gotten his driving permit. He'd asked his father about the use of the family car, and the father said, I'll make a deal with you. You bring your grades up, you study Talmud a little, get your hair cut, and then we'll talk about it. After about a month, the boy came back and again asked his father about the use of the car. He said, son, I'm very proud of you. You've brought your grades up, you've studied the Talmud diligently, but you didn't get your hair cut. The young man replied, but Abba, I've been thinking about that. Samson had long hair. Moses had long hair. Noah had long hair. And even Jesus had long hair. The rabbi said, yes, and everywhere they went, they walked. Now, as for Lois Weinstein's husband, Rabbi Moshe Rothblum taught us about creativity and nurturing talent. His 42 shows speak for themselves. Many of the melodies we use in our service were written by Rabbi Rothblum. L'Shamru was written by Rabbi Rothblum. There's a record out, a CD, with all of Rabbi Rothblum's music. And if you haven't heard it, I urge you to get a copy and listen to it. Two other things that I think he should be remembered for is that he didn't care who got credit so long as the job was done. He employed two young men whose names you will recognize when I tell them to you, who went on to great distinction in not only the American Jewish community, but the world Jewish community. Our assistant rabbi for 2 years was a man who Rabbi Rothblum hired named Danny Gordis. And you may know the name Rabbi Daniel Gordis. He comes to visit the United States periodically when he needs to replenish his treasury, and he is a renowned speaker. He lives in Jerusalem full-time. He's with the Shalom Institute and the Pardas Institute. And the second was a young rabbinic intern who Moshe said, I think this kid can amount to something. He was our rabbinic intern. His name was David Walpe. Both of those young men were employed by Moshe Rothblum. So he couldn't just pick out a pretty wife. He also knew how to pick out talent. You have to know that Rabbi Rothblum is totally without guile, and he trusts everyone. That's what makes him the wonderful person that he is. He's also someone who it's very easy to put on. One time on a phone call, he ranted for about 5 minutes till he finally took a breath, and I had not said a word. When he finally took this breath, I said, who is this? I know that sounds unbelievable. You ask him after the service if that's not a true story. He told me when I became president, I like a certain kind of candy. That's your job. Opening the curtain is a secondary job. You got to bring me the candy. I would bring him the candy. One week, I didn't bring him the right kind of candy. He complained. I dropped the whole bag in his lap, and I walked out. But on the way out, I kind of figured that was what he was going to say, that he was going to complain. I put a little note. I knew his curiosity would get the best of him. He opened up the note, and the note said, "When you come up here, don't laugh." Naturally, the power of suggestion was he read the note, and he broke out laughing. By that time, I had curved all the way around, sat in the back, and he was going like this to me. When he was president of the Board of Rabbis, the Pope came to Los Angeles, and he said to me, "Do you have a harmless little story I can tell the pontiff?" So I gave him one. On election day, the first Jewish president was elected. He called his mother, said, "Mom, I've won the elections. You've got to come to the swearing-in ceremony." "I don't know, what would I wear?" He said, "Don't worry, I'll send you a dressmaker." She said, "But I keep kosher." He said, "I'll see to it. I'm the president. You'll have kosher food." "How will I get there?" "I'll send a limousine." "Okay, if it makes you happy." The great day comes. Mama is seated between the Supreme Court justices and the future cabinet members. She nudges the gentleman on the right, and he said, "You see that boy with a hand on the Bible? His brother's a doctor." Moshe said to me, "That's no good." He said, "Have you got something else?" I said, "I haven't got a story that you can tell the Pope. Why don't you ask him where I can get some good vegetarian lasagna in Rome, because I'm going to be there in a few months." One day when I was president, we had Cesar Chavez sitting on the bima. He said, "I want you to make sure you behave." I absolutely did. And Mr. Chavez and I were in an animated conversation, and Rabbi Rothblum said to me, "What did you speak about?" I said, "I asked him how to pick out a ripe cantaloupe and watermelon." Now we come to Rabbi Bernhard. Rabbi Bernhard is unafraid to tackle controversial subjects in his sermon, in his life, and he certainly has creativity. He works the room, he plays those cymbals. I don't know what the tchotchkes are. He involves us in discussions. So he has a little bit of both of his predecessors. For the last few years after the high holidays, we have gotten together for coffee and a post-mortem on the services, the good, the bad, the ugly. He knows I won't pull any punches. He also appreciates good humor, so our annual coffee clutch is something we both look forward to. Isn't it, Rabbi? Yeah, okay. All of our rabbis have been concerned with and involved with our children. They've all felt that we should not foist upon them a premature adulthood, lest they lose the joy of aimless discovery, and that they need to learn to express their personality in their own unique ways. The story is told about a young Jewish mother who walks her son to the school bus corner on his very first day of kindergarten. "Behave, my bobula," she says. "Take good care of yourself and think about your mother, Tatala, and come right back home on the bus, Shane Kint. Mother loves you a lot, Kessela." At the end of the school day, the bus comes back. She runs to her son, hugs him. "So what did my bobula learn today on his first day of school?" He said, "I've learned that my name is Ryan." Humor is a source of the necessary inner strength, which has been one of our modus operandi for survival. Even though our people were miserable, they didn't disintegrate intellectually or morally. Self-mockery helped them to rise above their condition. You know, the great Henny Youngman said, "If it's true that we are here to help others, what exactly are the others here for?" A chief earmark of Jewish humor is our readiness to poke fun at our rabbis and our leaders and even at God. The story is told about the Jewish grandmother who's with her grandson at the beach playing in the water, standing on the shore. All of a sudden, a huge wave appears from nowhere, crashes directly into where the boy is waiting. The water recedes and the boy's no longer there. She raises her hand to the sky, cries, God, how could you? I've been a wonderful grandmother, a wonderful mother. I've kept a kosher home. I've given to B'nai B'rith. I've given to Hadassah. I've lit candles every Friday night. I've lived a life you'd be proud of." Finally, a voice boomed from the sky and said, okay. A few minutes later, another huge wave appeared out of nowhere, and on the beach, as the water receded, the boy was standing there, smiling, splashing as if nothing had ever happened. "Are you satisfied?" a voice said. She says, "He had a hat." I would suggest that by giving God a sense of humor, and we all know God's stories, these jokes make the Lord seem more human and with shortcomings. It's perhaps a way of getting closer. One can't help but wonder if these jabs at ourselves and God don't come from a desperate fear that God has left us or no longer loves us. It's a scary thought. And so we reach for our humor because anything which can be mocked immediately seems to be less threatening. Two last stories. The Jewish humor, said Freud, is the only humor with self-deprecation, and yet we do it with unrivaled flair and frequency. He said, I don't know of any other people making fun to such a degree of its own character. One example, Mandelbaum and his wife Sarah, after he died, Sarah phoned the Jewish Journal to place an ad. She said, what I want to say is Bernie is dead. The Journal editor said, for $25 you can use 6 words. Fine, said Sarah. Print, Bernie is dead. Lexus for sale. The story about the president who was playing with 5 of his fellow members poker, and one member lost $500 in a single hand and dropped dead. The president said, in memory of the member, we should finish the game standing up. And when the game was finished, he said, I'll tell the wife because I have the most discretion. He went and he said to Mrs. Goldberg, your husband lost $500. She said to him, he should only drop dead. The president said, from your mouth to God's ears. The last story deals with the rabbi, a cantor, and a president, all of whom were kidnapped. Each was granted a last wish because they had no money. The rabbi said, my one wish is to give a 2-hour-long sermon on a very complex topic that I've not been able to give. They said, okay, you can do that. The cantor said, my one wish is to be able to sing my own composition that runs approximately 2 hours long that I've never been allowed to sing. All right, you can do that. They said to the president, what is your wish? He said, just shoot me now. The last story deals with a man who was shipwrecked, and after 10 days, he comes upon an island where he sees a fellow with a yarmulke greeting him. And the shipwrecked man says, you must be Jewish. He says, yes, I'm Jewish. He says, oh, I'm so thankful to be alive, and then not only that, but to find another Jew. The one who lives there says, look, you'll get dressed up. I'll give you something to eat. I'll show you around the island. I'm the only one here. At least now I have somebody to sit and talk with. And as he walks him around, he shows him that there are 3 buildings. He said, what are the 3 buildings for? You said, you're the only one on the island. He said, well, the first building, that's my house. He says, yeah, what's the second building? He says, the second building, that's my shul, my temple. He says, what's the third building? He says, that's the shul I used to belong to. I moved to Ventura County 20 years ago, and yet this will always be the shul I belong to. Don't be like that long-stranded person. Don't make this the shul you used to belong to. Shabbat Shalom.